everybody, my name is Lisbette Marte, and I will be doing a presentation. I apologize for the way that I'm doing this since I decided to do a Prezi, and there's no way that we can record, so I decided to do it in a way that I could talk at the same time as present. So, in my paper, I researched the effects of divorce in Latin American children specifically. So, let's talk about what is divorce and what is the parental separation. To start off, some marriages might not end up in divorce. Divorce is where they officially there's an official separation with papers and the court where uh, there's papers known to have the speak about the separation, while some people might not be married but live together and have children together, and they decide to not be in the same household anymore and they just separate. So this is called a parental separation, while divorce is a more serious um, official way of parents divorcing if they're married. um, when we have this type of problem at home, I throughout my research I saw and um, I noticed that there are a lot of problems that come with this social problem that are affected by children due to the parent separation, which could be emotional problems, behavioral problems, academic, identity, developmental, and even commitment problems. Some of these problems do fall in different categories. That can bring us separate. They can bring us separate perspectives. Some of these could be called like the identity problem, which comes from the anthropology side of this, where it's just like they don't accept everything that's going on around them. Uh, another of these could fall into the sociology aspect of it, where they don't only hinder what their parents are going through, but the effects that they view on the relationships overall. Either could be in a short term or in a long term. Also, you could go through the psychology side of this, where the children can either have some type of experience of this dysfunction of physical or mental dysfunction, where they could either not eat or stay outside, or they can have a mental dysfunction where they can bring kind of like close themselves out and not do anything outside with relationships as well. So, talking about the problems that children do have, there's a very big impact on divorce. And some of these are, it could be either in divorce or parental separation, so it's either or. Some of this introduce a very big change in a child's life. Um, so some children might have to cope with only living with one parent since one is leaving and the other one is not. Some children might not want to live with that parent but decide to but want to live with the other, hence creating a lot of problems. Um, they see a lot of difference throughout households, even if it's like going to one house to the other, to kind of splitting themselves between their mom and their dad. Um, they become very very emotional since they're little. They do depend on their parents being together. They do think about living together as their parents being a perfect couple, but in reality, when this separation happens and divorce happens, they do get a very big uh, loss of trust, because they said that now that my parents are not together, I don't get to I don't believe anything that they have told me overall. So why would a lot of these things happen? A lot of children do not believe what's going on in front of them. The idea of divorce, because one, they're little, and if they're 5, 6, or 7, then they still don't understand what the concept is, what is happening in front of them. But in the long term, if they're a little bit older, like if we're dealing with adolescents, with teenagers, then they do understand a little bit more about what is going on between their parents. Um, some of the short-term effects that I have researched in my paper, that happens with a lot of children overall, is they do feel a lot of guilt. They feel that like maybe it was their fault that their parents divorced or separated. The Because of this, a lot of children do start getting depressed and they become angry, and then they have this feeling of resentment and of grudge against one of their parents, or maybe they're both of their parents. Again, with the feeling of loss, it can be either feeling of loss of trust, or just like a loss itself, which brings again the feeling of depression and anger. Some of these ways, some of the manifestations that children can be could show these feelings of short-term effects after a divorce or while their parents are going through divorce is through aggression, by hitting people, by slamming the doors, through violence, and not being cooperative with their parents or with their friends or other relationships that they're going with, that they have in a day-to-day basis. Um, some children, if they're little, they might even do they might wet their beds, and because they don't feel they don't feel protected due to the fact that their parents are not together, and a lot of their children even isolate themselves, even if they're not an only child and they have older siblings. They do tend to isolate themselves because they believe, I don't have my parents together, then there's no one to protect me if they're not together. However, in the long term, some of the effect of divorce can be a little more um, dangerous, and it's more shocking. Some of the few problems that I did research in my paper, it's about that there's behavioral problems. Some might even do a lot of alcohol abuse and drug abuse in the future because they didn't have both parents growing up, or because they didn't have anybody growing up to support them, because maybe the mother or the dad did not want their son, or the son or the daughter did not want to be with that person, with that parent. um, some even get to get married for very early because they want to feel that, they want to kind of feel in that hole that their other parent kind of left with somebody else, and that tends to a lot of people, a lot of children, to who grow up to fill in that spot with somebody else at a very early age. Some even become teenage parents because since they start getting married early, they start um, having sexual relations very early, so that tends to create this chain reaction with getting married and eventually um, getting becoming teenage parents. And at the end of everything, usually divorce children from divorce do end up to experience divorce in the long run, at the end of their relationship, because that's what they have seen and that's what they usually act upon. It's not true in every case, but mostly it has been researched that a lot of children do act upon uh, the experiences of what might lead to a divorce. Some of the personality traits that children like have when they're going through, like I mentioned before, they tend to be in either environment. It could be at home, it could be at school, it can be playing with their friends. They can become anxious, they can become insecure, they can be isolate themselves, very lonely. They're not happy, they might feel depressed, they might again with the feeling of guilt. There's a lot of negative traits that come with children experiencing or going through a parent's divorce. Um, to furthermore, to talk about what the another impacts that affect children in Latin America, because just because I'm talking about Latin American children, I'm talking overall in children, in children overall, that happens everywhere in the world, not only in America, in Latin America, because in children in Latin America can do know about how to cope with divorce. Some of these problems are going to are that especially Latin American children do uh, affect them is the idea of migration, because when their parent, maybe one of the parents wants to migrate to another country because they want to get them a better future, get them more money so they can have a better future. That feeling of loss of their parents leaving and not coming back for nobody knows how many years can do hinders a lot of emotions and a lot of remorse towards that person. And eventually a lot of parents do divorce or separate because um, such a long time separated, because of their immigration. They're migrating to another country does create a lot of problems, which creates a lot of these emotions that not only Latin American children feel, but I believe a lot of people overall around the world feel. A lot of children overall around the world feel. Uh, so I talk about how how it's different to preschoolers to to teenagers. Preschoolers usually they don't really understand what's going on, so they don't they just have to they just fear the fact that their parents are separated, that there's not going to be a mom and a dad together. While adolescents, like, they are more accepting since they actually know what's going on, and they do understand maybe what is going to happen in the future, and they cope with a little bit better. But sometimes at the end, the long term effects do get them, because in the long run, everything gets to them. Because a lot of problems can start arising because of the divorce. However, a lot of children do um, see divorce as a positive thing when it comes to uh, seeing their parents, happier, and not hearing their parents argue every night, and understanding that this separation might be really good for their parents, better for them, can which makes them, I'll go out there and get a healthier relationship that might be better for them. So a lot of teenagers, and not much for the preschoolers, or the children from like 5 to, let's say, maybe 8 or 9. But usually the children that are a little bit older do understand, and some might even be okay with this, and usually they look at the bright side. And how it is, some divorced families eventually do okay, and it is research that, how I said before, that if children do see the bright side of things, which some of them, a good percentage of them do, they usually do very well if they work together. Some of the books that I've used to kind of support my ideas of the effects of divorce in Latin American children is these certain books. My first book that I used was When I Was Puerto Rican by Esmeralda Santiago, which Esmeralda Santiago does just speak about her journey, her childhood journey through a small barrio in Puerto Rico, and all the way up to her graduation at Harvard, and the hardships that she went through, not only through being the eldest out of 7 children, but always having her parents fight about a lot of things that didn't even matter, and she still made it. One of the quotes that I used for my paper that I found it very appealing to my research was, there were more fights, more arguments, more yelling in the night, more long absences, until it seemed as if anything could be better than living with these people who hated each other. She understood, Santiago understood that there was a lot of things that their parents did not agree on, and that it was better uh, to kind of understand that they're better off without each other. So this constant fighting eventually led them to separate, and eventually her mom moved to New York City, and she found a better life. And even Esmeralda did a lot better, and she wanted to show kind of, her mom and her dad that stayed back in Puerto Rico, that even though that she was the daughter of an, single mother, she was going to do, she was going to make her proud, and eventually she did graduate from Harvard University, and with top honors. Another book that I used is La Mala del Cuento, which is the mean one of the story, by Vivian Mansour. It's usually, this story, it's about Marina. She's the protagonist of the story, and she goes through the parental separation of her parents, the divorce of her parents, and she has to, little by little, accept this new person, which is, her name is Sarah, that her dad is dating. She does not like this new person in her dad's life, so she plays a lot of pranks with Sarah, like putting um, insects in her sandwich, staining her dress at a dinner, making her go up in a roller coaster, because even though she knew she had scared of heights, like all these things to make her kind of explode and show her dad that she was not the person that she was, that this woman was. But eventually she did understand that people do have to move on, and that her dad was happier with this new woman that he ever was with his mom. And she knew that even though his mom and her dad were not her mom and her dad were not together, that they did love each other because they had her and they made her. So it was she was like, which made her understand even when she was only um, a very young lady. One of the quotes that I used was, "We all want to be the princess, the hero who kills dragons, the brave one who knows exactly how to act, and what to say in case of danger. But once I was the villain of the story, I apologize. I chose to be the villain." This is pretty much between the middle of the start of the story when she wanted to start getting the pranks, explaining that she wants to be the mean person. Uh, um, After Sarah to show her dad, but it didn't work out, and she eventually started liking Sarah for her dad. So the third book that I chose is Yo también tengo padre. In English is I also have a father, by Christine Nostlater. She's an Austrian author, but she also wrote this book um, in Spanish um, with another author who and published it in Mexico, which is very interesting to me. In this book, it's about felicidad, which is it's happiness in English, which she goes again through a divorce to her parents, and she doesn't understand her parents' separation at first because they both go their own ways, but she stays with her dad while her mom goes to Munich, and she wants to go with her mom because she feels that maybe her dad was the reason that they're separated. But once she goes abroad to Munich, she understands that um, she that the way they said the reason they separated was nothing that she thought of. That they separated because they just there was no love in them more between themselves, and that was the best thing that was for them. Eventually, she understands the reasons why her parents separated, and she goes back to her dad and appreciated the fact that she was with her dad, and because that's where she belonged, and she felt that. One of the quotes that I chose to talk about in my research was, "When I woke up, I heard two old women talking outside. One sounded like the receptionist. They were speaking about my mother moving to Munich to live with her boyfriend, a, a digno se que. It's a digno se que is like a nobody. I thought to myself, why would she take my sister and not me? Does she love her more than me? Is she more worthy than I am?" We can see this how going back to self blame, that maybe she thinks that she's the problem, that's why her mom left. So this is something that I spoke about in my paper. The last book that I spoke about in my paper is Al Querido Señor Henshaw. It's Dear Mr. Henshaw, um, by Amalia Martin Grimmer and Beverly Cleary. It talks about this 10-year-old Lee Boats who starts writing letters to his favorite author, and they kind of exchange back and forth letters, and eventually Mr. Henshaw does start giving him advice about his life problems and crisis that he's going through, like the separation of his parents, and kind of makes like a little diary with them, and eventually he we see um his journey from not understanding what's going on with his family problems and his parent separation, that to until the end when we see that he finally understands and does know that maybe it's for the best that his parents are separating. One of the quotes that I chose, it was it's my dad is a truck conductor, one of those who had a cab top of on top of the motor. The truck was the reason my parents divorced. In one of this in I chose this quote because in this quote, around in the same page, he was talking about his dad and how his mom and his dad are going through a lot of problems, and how his mom uh, didn't want his dad to work so much, but his dad only worked for them because he wanted them to get a better life, but his mom didn't understand that, so that's why they split up. So eventually, he started talking about why he doesn't believe that that's a a kind of a reliable reason for them to separate, but eventually understanding there was more to it than he knew, as in like that just they weren't perfect for each other like he always thought they were, and that gave him kind of like an epiphany of that maybe that things do happen for a reason, and that his parents might have a better life without each other, but I still know that they both will be there for him if he ever need them, for anything in the world. So of course, I also talked about Freeman, Lehman, and Scherer, in my research, and I used some of their ideas. One of them, of course, was the window and the on the door, and how we we have to see through different things in different ways. Excuse me. One of the things that I spoke about was that they also shared is that they express how it is very important for children to read books from around the world to give them an understanding about lives of other children and how they can relate. I saw this a lot about on my research because um, people from other countries, and children from other countries, can see that children from other countries uh, have they're having a similar relationship of having a similar problem, but they're still feeling the same way, so they can kind of have this connection, this bond between them and the other and the child that they're reading about, and this in these books that can make them kind of go through whatever they're going through a little bit easier, and um, not get stuck, but kind of step back and be like, yes, I'm going through this, and we're both going through this, and it might just happen the same way that things happen for him to myself. Um, I chose this quote. It says, "We must ensure that publishers are indeed serving all children and enabling readers to not only see themselves in books but also learn about others." Um, which goes back to what I said, that people can connect the idea of having children learning about each other through international literature, which might even help some children with the effects of divorce. Um, children might be depressed, children might be isolated, but they can, like, maybe they might be sitting in a room and reading about the children going through what they're going through, and seeing that even if they're isolating themselves, that eventually they will, things will get better in the end, and that life does not stop. Which is something that I did research in my paper, that a lot of children do kind of get stuck together. They get stuck in the journey because they see this divorce or this parental separation as the end of the world, but in reality, this is just a little obstacle on their journey that they're going to go through to be somebody in this world. So this is my bibliography. I appreciate everything, for you guys listening. I really thank you for taking time to read to go through my presentation. I apologize for the way that I did it, but I hope you guys understood everything that I said. Please, if you have any questions, just message them through the forum, and I would gladly answer them as soon as I can. Thank you very much, and have a good night.